we weren't using parental controls on his phone. We didn't have filters on the Wi-Fi. We didn't have filters on any device, no screen limits, nothing. And I just fully trusted him, which
Yeah,
is not bad. I mean, it's
correct.
great to trust our children, but I didn't understand that the pornography industry is preying on our children. And so it's not a matter of I don't trust you, my child. It's more a matter of I don't trust them, and they are going to get at you however they can.
Welcome to thesextalk.com, where parents can go to get clear and confident to have the sex talk with their kids.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Sex Talk podcast. I have Barb Winters from Hopeful Mom Ministries with us. And man, do we have an episode for you today. So what happened that inspired Barb's work and really calling today is she discovered that her son was addicted to pornography at an early age. And so if you're a mom and you're listening and you're checking in right now, what you're going to get from this episode is the support, the help, the next steps you need where your son or your daughter might be struggling with pornography. Maybe you know, maybe you don't know, but what we're going to hopefully answer today is what do we do now? How do we keep our children from being exposed? And if we discover that they are exposed and or addicted to pornography, how do we respond? So Barb, thank you so much for being here today.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure to be here.
So tell me, Barb, if you're willing, a little bit more about your story and the genesis of Hopeful Mom and some of the books that you've written. I kind of told them a little bit, but I'm sure you can do it much better justice than
Sure.
I did.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. Well, probably, I don't know, when our son was around 14 years old, we discovered that he had been watching pornography, and it was completely out of the blue for us, my husband and I. We had no idea. This wasn't on our radar. This wasn't anything we thought was in our home. We had the sex talk with them, once. But we didn't, dive deep into what all was out there because quite frankly, I was ignorant of it all. I didn't really understand the depth and the accessibility and how much was out there. So my husband and I were just on a walk one day enjoying our new Florida surroundings. We just moved to Florida and came around the corner and saw our son standing in our yard just in hysterics. We had
Mhm.
no idea what had happened. He was really upset. And when we finally reached him, we got to him and he was just gibberish, saying things like warning, police, watching pornography. And I was like, what is happening? It was kind of like, when your world sort of collapses in
Mhm.
on you. I kind of felt like that. I thought I was going to throw up. I was trying to figure out what he was trying to tell us. It turns out he'd been watching pornography and a bogus warning had popped up stating that if he didn't send money to whoever was at the other end, that they were going to call the police and have him arrested. Of course, his dad realized that that was a scam right away, but he did not realize that. So it was his fear of being arrested that made him disclose to us what was going on. And as a mom, this was just horrific. I had all the feels. I felt shock and anger and guilt and shame, everything. Um, but I also felt kind of alone because we began to process information and began to help him a little bit, but I didn't feel like I could tell anybody about this. I felt like, because of the stigma, because of the shame, all of the things surrounding all of this, that I couldn't tell my friends what was going on. And so we put some protections in place. We helped him with various ways of keeping this from him. But at that point in time, he didn't really want to stop. So when he was 16, he came back to us. And it was at that point that he decided that he needed to get away from this struggle that he was having. And it was at that point that we learned he was actually addicted. And we
Mhm.
learned how steeped in the past it really was, that he had been exposed probably around 9 or 10. And it
Wow.
had been going on for all that time. And so, through all that, and we can open up that information a little more in a minute, but through all that, I was like, what is going on? I did some research and I learned how prevalent pornography was, and I learned how many children were exposed at an early age. And I thought to myself, why aren't we talking about this? Why
Mm.
aren't parents talking with each other about this? And why aren't parents talking with their children about this? And so I just felt that little nudge, from God, like, well, hello, knock, knock, knock. That's you. And so that
Mm.
was kind of the beginning of Hopeful Mom. And that's when I started hopefulmom.net, decided, you know what, I'm going to start talking about this, and not just from a prevention point of view, because we do need that, obviously, but also from, like a point of view of a mom who's been there and what I felt and how I had to process through all this myself too. So that's kind of where Hopeful Mom came into play. And then later, I started working in the schools as a sexual risk avoidance specialist. And then I wrote Sexpectations, helping the next generation navigate healthy relationships, which is more about like talking with our kids about healthy relationships versus just constantly talking about the negatives. So that's a little bit about me and my story and how I got to Hopeful Mom.
No, that's fantastic. And man, to be called in such a way, I imagine most listening moms hope that it doesn't happen that way.
Mm.
However, way to say yes to the call, way to lean in, walk alongside of your son. I mean, when you were telling that story, I was thinking about your 14-year-old son, 15-year-old son. When that would have happened, man, I could literally feel my blood get cold of like, okay, this pop up that says, we're going to report you, we're going to call the police, you're somewhere you shouldn't be, your entire world is closing in around you. That's terrifying. And in a weird sort of way, God used that still to bring light to that experience, to that struggle. Obviously, then, you and your husband were able to step in. So you mentioned it briefly, but I'm curious because it's a question I had when you were telling that story. You said you had the sex talk. What does that mean? And what did you guys do? And at what age did you have the sex talk with your son prior to this exposure event?
Yeah. So I was a homeschool mom. So, in one of our curriculums during the health class, there was a book that we were to read to our children. And basically, that looked like me sitting down with the book and asking dad to be, on the couch next to us so that he could be available and reading the book. And I remember, my face getting all red and blushy and talking about, the various parts, et cetera. And then, kind of leaving the book up in front of my face so I didn't even have to have that eye contact with my kids. And I read it and I shut it and I was like, well, if you have any questions, there's dad. Have a great life. That sort of thing. It's kind of, and that's how I was taught,
Yeah.
we have that one and done sort of situation, and it wasn't a part of just everyday life, which is what, of course, you and I tell parents now, like, it can't be that one and done. It can't be read the book, shut it, and say, good luck. We have to incorporate it into all of our conversations.
Well, as an expert, I was going to say you are one of the perfect people I can ask, well, what does that mean, Barb? Because if you could go back and do it again, and if you could do it differently, how would you do it? Because someone listening is going to say, hey, I want to take notes. Hey, I want to write down exactly what you would do differently. I'd like to learn from your mistakes so I don't have this story too. So what would you do differently?
Well, the first thing I would do is be more comfortable in who I am and what I believe about it. So I
Mm.
think that a lot of us have issues with it because we don't even really know where we stand. What does God say about it? Is it okay to incorporate him into our conversation about sex? Yes, it is. Imagine he actually created it. But we have that little trepidation about, is this okay? So first of all, looking at what do we believe and why do we believe it, and owning that, and allowing God to shape our thoughts about what is sex and what's healthy sexuality and that sort of thing. And then, starting the conversation at an early age, 3, 4, 5, pointing out the various parts of our bodies and using the correct anatomical terminology, etc. And then of course there are some great books to introduce pornography to our children, and Good Pictures Bad Pictures of course is one that comes to mind. But starting at that young age, I used to think it was weird to talk about this with a young children. But the more I've thought about it and the more I've listened to other experts, the more I realize that the earlier we started, the easier it is to continue that conversation. Because if we start at like 10, 11, 12, all of a sudden we're just introducing this concept that we've never had discussions about before. And it's way more awkward than if we just casually talk about it as if it's no big deal as they're growing up. So that's the first thing I would do. And then the next would be to model healthy relationships, because it's not just all about what they shouldn't be doing. We really need to be talking about what they should be doing and what to look for and why it's important for us to wait to have sex, and why it's important not just to say no to pornography, but to say yes to self-control and abstinence. Why are these good things? And I know these are like words that are like taboo now. We don't say abstinence. Purity. These are things that we need to understand what does that mean to us, and then put it into their jargon. Maybe don't use that word, but put it in some way that makes sense to them. So, and having those ongoing conversations. And then of course having, one of the things I would absolutely do if I went back is understand how important filters are. We
That's
need
good.
those guardrails. We need that accountability. And it's not that we're leaning on them to do the job for us, because that's false. They're not going to do the job for us, but it really does help protect our children.
No, that's really good. I like to use the analogy of offense and defense. Parents are really naturally good at defense. They want to keep their child from watching the bad movie, going and hanging out with the friend that cusses too much, or they're great at that. They could almost do that in their sleep. It's the offense part that you're getting at, where it's like, but also, mom and dad, you have to have an offensive game, because, back to the sports analogy, I'm not a super sports nerd, but you can't win if you only have defense. You must also have that offense. So I'm curious, when your son was 14, did you guys have any filters or guardrails in place, or is that how he was maybe so easily able to stumble upon it?
Yeah. No, we didn't. We had no idea that was how important that really was. So we did not. We weren't using parental controls on his phone. We didn't have filters on the Wi-Fi. We didn't have filters on any device, no screen limits, nothing. And I just fully trusted him, which
Yeah,
is not bad. I mean, it's
correct.
great to trust our children, but I didn't understand that the pornography industry is preying on our children. And so it's not a matter of I don't trust you, my child. It's more a matter of I don't trust them, and they are going to get at you however they can. And so,
That was
I just,
literally what I was just going to say.
yeah.
And every parent listening, and I'd love for you to speak to this, because I do talk to a lot of homeschool parents and I was homeschooled, so I can say this. They like, we still have time. We still have time. Our
Mhm.
child is not exposed and or plugged into as much of culture, and maybe they are listening and maybe they do have filters, but maybe their friend has a smartphone, or maybe they go over to a friend's house and there's a magazine. That was one of my early exposures. Obviously, magazines are kind of dead today, but the short version is, I think you hit the nail on the head. That paints it perfectly. You can and should trust your child implicitly, but you should not trust the world around them. And you should almost expect the worst. What is it? Expect the worst, plan for the best, or I butcher that, but it's something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And their friends do have it. And yeah, the homeschool community is not immune, as I found out. Neither are the pastors' kids, as I found
Mhm.
also. Just because they're growing up in the church, just because they're being homeschooled does not mean they're living in a cave under a rock. They're going to be exposed one way or another. And so the best thing we can do as parents is let them know we're not afraid of these conversations. We're going to say the words. We're going to talk about pornography and masturbation and all the body parts, etc. We're not going to act like this is any big deal be, to have the conversation. And so, we're going to be that safe space and let you know that when things go awry, you can come to us. And I didn't realize how big of a deal it was that he actually did come to us, because the more, like,
Mhm.
I'm in the schools now, I talk with 8th graders, 9th graders or whatever, and they're like, we'd never tell our parents if that happened. And so I didn't realize that it was even such a big deal that he did come to us. And I'm so
Mhm.
grateful that he at least felt comfortable enough and trusted us and knew that we would do our best to help him. And that's the relationship we have to cultivate with our kids, so that when they are exposed, they know, well, mom or dad will know what to do about this, and they will come to us.
Yeah, I mean, that's why you mentioned it already, but that book, Good Pictures, Bad Pictures by Kristen Jensen is so valuable. And the
Yeah.
topic itself is good. And I think parents regularly give me the wide-eyed treatment when they say, how early should I be talking to my children? And I say, we encourage you to begin the conversation around the age of 5 or 6 and have age-appropriate conversations with them for a decade. But you really touched on it, because you said in your son's story he was exposed at a pretty early age. You were saying you
Mhm.
think 8, 9, or 10?
Yeah, in that area. Mhm.
And have you seen that as a trend? What in some of your work, what are you starting to sense as the average age of exposure to this kind of stuff?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I've had moms tell me that their 4-year-old ran across it because, the mom handed it a device, they're watching a YouTube video for a minute, and then that video is over and another video pops right up. I've had moms tell me, yeah, we went on a play date and, age 7, and the kid was exposed, or sports or whatever. When I'm in the schools and I talk with kids and I tell them the average age of exposure is 8 to 11, they nod. Yeah, I was, and they'll mumble under their breath. Yeah, I was whatever, 9, 10, 11.
Yeah, and I think it's helpful for parents. I'm a parent as well, so I'm equally processing this with a 4-year-old
Mhm.
already, and teaching him about the names of his body parts and what can be touched and can't be touched and who can touch and who can't touch, giving him that defense, helping him understand what is right, what God made, and how to use it. But I think it's easy to think, man, I wish I didn't have to do all of this. Man, as a parent, I really wish I didn't have to be so vigilant. But then I think a different narrative, which is, what if I could give my child a vibrant biblical foundation for sex and
Mhm.
sexuality, so he's walking through the world with this armor on at a young age, and he can be impervious to the darts of the enemy that unfortunately your son had hit him at such a young age, and millions of children do. So, I mean, is that some of your motivation in your work as well? I'm curious.
Oh, yeah, I love how you gave that picture. I've got it in my head. I'm like, "That's fantastic." But yeah, that is something I wanna do, is, like, empower parents to, like, be the best parent that they can be, right? And that starts with us and
Mhm.
understanding who we are, and the background that we have, and why we believe what we believe, and what all our hurts and stuff, and what we brought into our relationships, and then working through that and learning how to turn that into something healthy, when to forgive and when to seek forgiveness, and when to, understand that, well, I got to pull back here, or I got to work through this on my own over there and not take it out on my kids. How how do we learn all this so that we can be the best parents, so that they can be the best adult? Because we're not raising
Mhm.
kids, we're raising adults, potential adults that we want to thrive in
Mhm.
society, and we want them to contribute to society, right? Not just take from it. And so, yeah, when we learn that, when we learn what's healthy, what's not healthy, and model that to our kids, understanding that we're not perfect,
Oh, for
and
sure.
we're going to
Yeah, you're gonna
fail.
get it wrong. Exactly.
Right, right, exactly. So, yeah, I love that picture.
Yeah, no, that one actually ironically just came to me, but I think it's helpful because so many parents recoil at this conversation. But
Hmm.
what if instead of recoiling, we leaned in? I mean, that's the
Hmm.
work you're doing, that's the
Yeah.
work we're doing. We want mom and dad to lean in because we want to see an entire generation of children who grow up having the sex talk from mom and dad, getting that biblical foundation so that they can thrive in the world, so that they cannot be subsumed by our sexually broken
Mhm.
culture. And for a parent listening, Barb, I'm curious. In unfortunately, it is the case that many parents will hear this and decide to begin leaning in, and it might be, I won't say too late, but they might have some ground to make up.
Yeah.
And in your story with you and your husband and your 14-year-old, who you said came back around again at 16, like what did that look like? That coming back around, walking alongside of him in that uphill process because you weren't able to get to it
Right.
before that.
Right. Well, first of all, again, offering grace to
Yeah.
yourself, which I did not do
Mm,
until later, and then
okay.
offering grace to our children. It looks like us not shaming and not blaming and not throwing darts, not making anybody feel guilty, including ourselves, because like we've already said, the pornography industry really is the culprit here. They're the predators. They're the ones to blame. And so, when we see it the way we should see it, it's going to become easier for us to come alongside our children. And that's the thing. We need to come alongside them. And one of the things that I think my husband and I did well, not always, but in general, is that we let our child know we are on your side.
Mm,
It
that's good.
We are here because we love you and we will always love you. Nothing you say or do or any of your behaviors can make you lose that love from us. And we accept who you are, but we're also, because of that love, called to protect you. And so we
Hmm.
are going to put some boundaries in place. We're going to change some household rules and some rhythms, because we had to change some rhythms of some things that were going on. So all of us were changing our lifestyle. We were trying to get full night's sleep and not allowing things to wake us up in the middle of the night. We were changing our accountability. We were changing how we use devices. So, but constantly communicating that we're on your side, and we're not punishing you by making these changes. Instead, we are protecting you. And
Mm,
especially with older children, he my son was 16 at the time we were working through some of this again. um we want to ask for their input. They're valuable. We cannot change anyone. we
mm,
we can't strong arm them. We can't bribe them. We can't coerce them. We can't force them into making this decision. And even if we take away their devices and lock them down, they're going to find a way if they want it. So we have to make sure that we are allowing them to take ownership of their own healing,
mhm,
which is easier for someone who wants to heal. And I understand that not everybody wants to. But allowing them, asking open-ended questions like, how will you feel safe here? What are times that you feel triggered? Times, places, smells, sights? What is it that makes you want to go and run to pornography? What was the origin of it? Just asking some open-ended questions. And of course, as a mom, I realized that I wasn't going to get all the details, which was fine. Allowing them to have an accountability partner that's not me. Giving them some space and asking them those open questions, and yet still being there for them, making sure that we're checking in and we're having those accountability check-ins and, we're offering. I mean, one of the things that was kind of like hard, if you will, for me and prickly was the fact that my son said he didn't want to be alone. Well, he
Hmm.
was 16 and we homeschooled. I'm used to running errands in the middle of the day and letting him do his own thing. And so, that I felt like I became the full-time babysitter, and it was hard. I talked about those family rhythms changing a little bit. All of a sudden, I've got my 16-year-old like basically tied to me all day long. But it was okay, in the long I it was a little difficult in the moment, but in the long run, in the back of my head, I knew like this is important and this is my job as a parent in order to take care of him and make sure that he's healing. And so, for parents out there who find out things, I mean, first of all, I know this sounds a little crazy, but celebrate the fact that it has come out into the light because
Hmm.
things that are in the dark are just going to fester and become worse. And so if we decide all of a sudden, well, let's go on a little expedition to see what's been happening and we find things we didn't know about or we don't want to see, it's okay. It's celebrate that fact because we have to know what's going on in order to help our children heal.
That's so invaluable, Barb. And I've been doing this work for 8 years, and I have never once heard a conversation around how a mom and a dad can lean in and walk alongside of their son or daughter who's addicted to pornography. So this is huge. You mentioned helping them take ownership of the process, equally walking alongside of them. And I would say you didn't say this word, but it's very much like being a coach alongside of them.
Mm-hmm.
And man, that's so beautiful. The way that you explained how you guys opened up and dialogued about the different complications, nuances, patterns, and behaviors. There was sacrifice. You had to learn how to sacrifice something. Like, I think that's invaluable because the amount of moms that I talk to that begin this conversation and find out their 14-year-old's been looking at porn for the last 4 years is literally countless. And I would say your perspective specifically right here is invaluable for that reason alone, because mom doesn't know what to do, doesn't, hey, dad, fix this. You're a man. He's a man. You guys figure this out. What would you say to that response?
It's not just the dad's responsibility, you
Tell
know.
me more.
Well, dad can dad can understand from a different perspective than mom can. So obviously that relationship is very important and needs to be solid, as solid as it can be. But a lot of dads don't want to touch this with a 10-foot pole. And so, sometimes the responsibility ends up on mom. Well, she thinks she's not responsible, so it kind of just falls through the cracks. But I have a perspective that I can help. And so, when we see we know now that the pornography that's out there is objectifying and violent and demoralizing, and so I can speak to that as a woman, as
Hmm.
a wife. Here is how this is going to affect relationships going into the future, and here is why what we're seeing in these videos is wrong and not realistic in any way, shape, or form. So we can speak to those parts, and we can also come alongside them as someone who's probably a little more sensitive and can
Hmm.
understand, like, okay, you're feeling shame and you're feeling guilt and you're feeling anger at yourself. These are all feelings that I can relate to as a mom. And so we can help them process some of the feelings that they're going through. Yeah.
Oh, that's so perfect. Yeah, and I think it's best for someone listening to realize, as you and your husband did, like when this happens, there is no easy button,
Right.
right? Like, unfortunately, you have a journey that is many years long, that is hard and difficult, worth it, but hard and difficult. And I know you resonate with this, but that's some of my deep motivation as to why I wake up in the morning, is because if you're listening right now and this isn't your story, I want to keep you from that narrative. I
Yeah.
want to prevent your child and you from going through that. I want you to flourish in your marriage, in your family, in your parenting, in your guidance with your child. And I want your child to flourish and not have to go through that kind of struggle, because you didn't mention this, but it is recognized and known now that we're talking addiction level, dopamine level, drug addiction level stuff with this super novelty, super stimulus, hyper accentuated fake pornography. Everything in the world is fake, twisted, and not real. And our children get hooked on what is literally cocaine or meth, or pick another illicit extreme drug on the market today. The brain scans are starting to show that that's almost exactly what's happening to their brain when they get exposed early. And they have no breaks in their brains. Like, what do we expect? And so, Barb, if a mom or a dad just heard all of this and they're like, I don't know where to start, Barb. Oh my goodness, what do I do now? What would be your final encouragement to them going forward?
Sure. My final encouragement is their story's not over, and neither is yours. And this does not define them, and nor does it define you. So there's a lot of life left, and just because something's happened in the past doesn't mean that they don't have a hope and a future that's going to be fantastic and successful. And by the way, because a lot of people ask me, my son is walking in freedom from his pornography struggles. It's I mean, I can't say it's behind him in the sense that he'll never, ever again, but this is something he does not struggle with anymore. And so a lot of people want to know, well, how's your son doing? He's doing
No, I'm
fantastic. Yeah.
so glad you mentioned that. That's important because I know your story, but in that you and your husband walked alongside of your son to a place where he is flourishing today. And the work that I do with Proven Ministries, with Proven Men, right? I'm engaging individuals that have been struggling for 20 years, 25 years in marriages that have been addicted the entire time they've been married. And that's another reason why I love what your ministry is doing, Hopeful Mom, and what we're equally trying to do alongside of you on the front lines with thesextalk.com, which is say, hey, I would love to not have a job anymore. Can we please empower an entire generation of children to thrive with sex and sexuality from a biblical basis and foundation, so that, back to my analogy at the beginning, they can walk through the world with armor on and strong and vibrant. They can enter marriage pure and innocent. And man, what a beauty that would be. What a gift they could give to their future spouse. And as they, like, I talk about this, Barb, you'll like this picture, but the idea of a generational curse-breaking generation where those children grow up, and what if their children are almost just birthed into that kind of freedom, are birthed into that kind of vibrancy? And for my generation, and I would say your son's generation, I can speak to this because it was really the Gen X and the millennial generation that were handed the internet, smartphones, free porn, and a wildly hypersexualized media that was really handed down from the sexual revolution that we saw in the 70s and the 80s. But it wasn't in front of everybody and walking around in their pockets until my generation. And so I am praying, and alongside of you, I know that we as parents now can raise up a generation that don't have the story that we have. Would you agree?
Absolutely. They are our hope. I highly believe it's the next generation that's going to change the world, and they're going to say, we're not taking this anymore, and we're shutting this all down. Yeah.
Barb, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for what you do for your ministry. If anybody wants to find you, where can they find you? Because I know there's a mom listening right now that's like, Barb, I have questions.
Yes, absolutely. Hopefulmom.net is where you should find. Start there. I've got links to all my social media there, and there's a place where you can contact me directly through the website, but start at hopefulmom.net.
Well, thank you so much, Barb. This has been a great episode, and we'll talk to you soon.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right, take care.
Welcome to thesextalk.com, where parents can go to get clear and confident to have the sex talk with their kids.
Because I think sometimes we think we're the first generation of Christians who's had to live in a sexually depraved society, and we're not.
We are so glad that there is material like this for our world.
We ourselves are often nervous about having the conversations with our kids.
The sex talk is about so much more than the birds and the bees or explaining to your kids where babies come from.
In that, we need to come alongside them and serve as a coach.
We only have a window of time to invest in our children.
What do you wish you would have had when you were 12?
We're going to take a journey that might be a bit uncomfortable, but if we will pass through the truth shall make us free.
It is such an important conversation for you to have with your children, and we are just so thankful that it's now available.
What these conversations are, I think, is something that our culture and society need to be having holistically.
Because we do believe that it is life-changing for you, your marriage, for your family, and for your child. We are so honored to be your guides throughout each session of this course. So let's jump in.